Claude Burns, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Your company, Office Libations, looks like it provides some of the coolest snacks and refreshments to offices in the San Francisco Bay Area. You keep everyone stocked up with things from local produce to cold brew and kombucha on tap, which just sounds really awesome. I'm really excited to hear more about that and how you got the idea for the company, how it began, and sort of what you're doing now. But before we get started, why don't you just introduce yourself? Maybe tell us where you went to college, where you've worked in the past, what you're doing now for Office Libations, and what led you to this role.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rebecca. My name's Claude Burns, and I'm the founder and CEO of Office Libations. Prior to sort of starting my entrepreneurial journey, I went to the United States Naval Academy. I was class of '06, served 6 years on active duty, and then went to business school at MIT Sloan. And pretty much right out of business school, sort of had an idea for a company and moved to the Bay Area and launched that company. And sort of a little bit of a journey, and that company sort of morphed into what became Office Libations.
That's really cool. And let's talk more about the transition from being in the military to becoming an entrepreneur. What did that journey look like?
I had kind of an interesting military path that was sort of a little bit non-traditional, even coming out of the academy. And when I was sort of looking at getting out of the military, when I was looking at what jobs I would get, I was like, okay, this seems interesting, but not really. Well, this kind of seems interesting, but it requires sort of an MBA, and ultimately decided to sort of pursue an MBA because I thought that would be able to sort of the jobs that I thought were interesting would be open to me. But really sort of always, I think deep down, wanting to start and run a business was sort of what I really wanted to do. And what's interesting is the one business school I got into, I actually wrote my applications not about being an entrepreneur at all, and that's the one I got into. So then I decided to go against it and become an entrepreneur afterwards.
That's awesome. What are some of the skills you think an entrepreneur should have? What's helped you most in your journey as an entrepreneur?
I think you've got to be flexible and adaptable. I think that's probably I think the past 2 years has probably shown most people that sort of just a trait that is good to have. And I think the business world changes so quickly. Markets change very, very fast, and you have to be adaptable and flexible. So I think that's probably number one. To be an entrepreneur, you just have to have a level of confidence, because whatever today looks like, tomorrow will be different. And so you have to sort of have that, I don't necessarily call it innate, but it's an innate or learned confidence. And I think that's one of the things that military entrepreneurs in particular bring, is because we've been thrown in, a variety of situations that we didn't expect and had no idea, no way to even prepare to expect it. And we just had to trust sort of our training and skills to be able to be successful no matter what, life throws at us.
No, that's awesome. And I was reading today, you had to pivot Office Libations during the pandemic. You pivoted a little bit to provide snack boxes for clients' employees working from home, which is awesome. So it's cool to see how that adaptability has come through for you really recently. So speaking of your business, why don't you tell us more about Office Libations, how you came up with the idea, and what you're doing now?
Yeah, so Office Libations really is sort of the result of more of a market pull than any sort of I came up with this idea behind what we were going to do. Originally, when I started sort of my entrepreneurial journey, I started a beer company that was sort of in the subscription e-commerce space. And so one of the channels we started approaching were offices. And so we were sort of selling beer into a lot of the offices and tech companies throughout the Bay Area. And they were sort of like, okay, well, we like your beer, but also could you get us some other things? Could you get us Lagunitas? Could you, get us wine? And so we started to provide other services and products to offices. And what we sort of found was there wasn't really a sort of high service, high quality vendor in sort of the alcohol space. And then it sort of was like, well, you guys do a great job with this. can you also do sort of other kegged products like kombucha or cold brew? And then we started doing that. And then they're like, can you also do our snack programs for us? And so then we added that. And then, before long, it's like, okay, we're actually in a very different business than sort of what we started at. The original sort of company, the original idea sort of shut down, and but the company survived, and sort of a pivot away from sort of that, beer centric brand to sort of a full service corporate refreshment provider. And we work with a lot of, your name brands at companies that everybody knows and loves, as well as a bunch of early stage sort of Series A, Series B startups that you'll hear about probably in the next 5 years or so, and they'll enter sort of mainstream consciousness. But it's really fun to work with those companies and sort of see their journeys and growing headcount, moving offices, and being able to support them in their journeys and what they're doing is really, really fun. And then the second part that's really great is we get to work with a lot of local sort of food and beverage brands and sort of place them into offices. So as a sort of a foodie, being able to work with those local brands and people who are making awesome food and drink is really, really fun.
That is so cool. This conversation is making me hungry.
Yeah.
What are some of your goals for the next 3 to 5 years for Office Libations? How do you hope to grow?
Yeah, I mean, I think our number one thing is to get through the pandemic. It's still, a huge impact on our business. And one of the reasons we actually decided to do a fundraise was because of the uncertainty behind, when will the pandemic end and what will it look like, and sort of, how much longer do we got? I think it started at 2 weeks, and I don't know what week number we're on, but we're pretty far past that. And so I think that's goal one, is just get the business back to where we are. Unfortunately, we don't really control that. The second piece for me is really building the team to be able to function and survive sort of without me. I think that for me has been my primary goal as an entrepreneur, is to be able to build a company and build a team that doesn't need me. And I think that sort of comes from, being in the military, where you're always sort of training your replacement. You're always sort of training for your next job. And so for me, it's always like, how do we make sure our team is able to accomplish sort of the mission and continue to perform without me in place, and sort of without our other leaders, and sort of go down sort of the, chain of command, so to speak, in the company, and make sure that everyone sort of is able to know the role above and below them, and really build that really cohesive unit that's able to do our jobs well.
That's really awesome. It's great to hear how you're growing the company. And speaking of COVID, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you sort of pivoted the company and how you had to change when the pandemic happened, and maybe some of the challenges, but also some of the opportunities that resulted from that?
Yeah, I would like to say we, pivoted and like we're growing faster than we are, but that's just not what happened. We really sort of went in complete survival mode. We unfortunately had to lay off a lot of our team, and we've been able to bring some of those people back, which has been awesome. Sort of the restrictions have lifted, and the business has improved. We switched to doing some e-commerce boxes, which sort of you alluded to earlier, and sort of allowing companies to remind their employees that are working remotely that they still care about them. Some put little notes in them. They do like summer picnics, or we've had a very like successful Oktoberfest box that's sort of coming up again. So we found ways to sort of support our clients through the pandemic and sort of connecting with their employees still. But a lot of what we've had to do is unfortunately just focus on surviving and using the time to sort of reimagine what the business can be and how we can operate more effectively and efficiently. There's probably nothing really nice about a global pandemic, but the nice part is we've seen a lot of companies that we competed with, that were competitors in this space, especially venture-backed competitors, sort of exit the space or be acquired by like bigger competitors. That's created a ton of opportunity and going forward, just because a lot of those companies, like any sort of recession, didn't survive. So we think there's a ton of opportunity once we get through the pandemic to be able to gain new business and sort of really grow the company and sort of supercharge its growth. I'd say like 90% of our customers aren't back in the office, but our revenues aren't down 90%. So we've been able to find new clients and bigger clients, and we've streamlined operations tremendously with a lot of sort of tech improvements that we've been able to make through our internal processes. So we sort of got to pause to reimagine the company, build it back, better, and have been fortunate enough to make it through the pandemic, even though it's not over yet, where a lot of our competitors didn't.
I think a lot of other small businesses and companies out there, I'm sure they can relate to some of those challenges, and we'll be really interested to hear about your experiences too. Going back to some of your goals and how you're focused on growing the company, how has Localvest helped you achieve some of your goals so far?
So we raised a round earlier this year on Localvest, and so the purpose of that round, we were a bootstrap company, never really planning on raising capital. We've been able to grow pretty quickly around the Inc. 500 list and a couple years in a row. So we didn't have a plan on raising capital because we were able to sort of grow the business profitably and at a pretty good clip as well. And in doing so, I didn't build a lot of relationships with sort of the investment community. So Localvest, being primarily sort of focused on military entrepreneurs, sort of was a way to speed up the process of raising capital, because and probably to my bad, but because I didn't build a lot of those relationships, the fact that being a service academy grad and being a military veteran sort of built that initial trust, and Localvest sort of helped facilitate that reaction between investors who like investing in military entrepreneurs and military entrepreneurs like myself. So that was probably the speed at which we were able to bring the round together. It was much faster than I think even if I had relationships, we would have been able to do. And then also, I think for us being a little bit of a distressed sort of company, most companies are raising money as they're growing revenue. We went out to raise money when we lost 80% of our revenue. And so how do you sort of do that? And part of it is I think the community knowing that military veterans aren't going to quit and when times get tough, and that they're going to persevere through it, and be able to get through the other side. So I think Localvest put me in contact with a bunch of people who sort of know who I am, even though they've never met me.
That's really cool. It's great to hear how it's that network, but it's also that community of people that you connect with on a fundamental level, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit more. How was the experience like raising capital on Localvest?
I love their platform. It's super intuitive to use. You sort of build what they call a deal tile, and you sort of put all your company information, and you can sort of direct people to it, which makes it very, very easy. Everyone's getting the same information. So if you modify, a financial forecast or swap it in and out, and now everybody has access to the same information. You're able to post updates. So as we started getting commitments to the round, we were able to post those updates so people could say, okay, this is halfway subscribed already. If I'm interested, I should probably get in on it. And so I think the ease of putting the information on the portal so that people can access it was awesome. It was just very intuitive. I've used a lot of different things that you have to put information on, and that was super easy. The second thing that's really awesome about it is the way you can connect with, see who sort of viewed your deal, and be able to reach out to them and sort of, proactively follow up if you have any questions. Everyone's so busy all the time that it's yeah, I'm interested and I have some questions, but I'll get around to it, and you end up not getting around to it. So by being able to sort of proactively follow up with people, it allowed us to, I think, speed along that fundraising process and sort of, be oh yeah, I do have this question about this. And as soon as you answer the main thing, that they're okay, I get it now. And I think that's super valuable in moving along sort of a fundraising process, or any sales process. If you're looking to buy whatever pants online and you're oh, does it come with, you're oh, someone just answered my question. Okay, yeah, I'll buy it. So I think that aspect of connecting with investors who could view your deal was super valuable.
That's great. And what advice do you have someone who's just starting their capital raise? And what would you say were some best practices for raising capital?
Know if you actually want to raise money. I think it's I think raising capital is something that, gets a lot of PR and press, but I don't think it's necessarily always the best way to build a company. And I think there are a lot of other options that people can pursue. Like I said, we did not plan on raising capital. So I'm probably in the boat of people who are like, don't raise capital if you don't need to. And a lot of times when you think you need to, you don't necessarily need to raise capital. That being said, I think that goes a lot to knowing what you want out of your company and like where it needs to go. And sometimes like, what resources do you need? If you don't have the resources, you certainly need to raise capital. And so I think once you figured out is where you want to take your company and it does capital help with that, then it's knowing sort of what you're selling and sort of putting on your investor hat and looking at sort of your company, your offer objectively, not from it's my company and I'm very proud of it and like we're going to do well, but what are the investors' other options? There's a lot of different people raising an investment now in sort of the private world. So private equities are much more available for the average investor than they were in the past. There's real estate that has always, been a popular sort of investment class. And then, you just buy an index fund. So how does your, opportunity compare to what an investor could get in other ways? And a lot of people invest in private companies for many different reasons that are outside of just returns. But I think it's really putting on that investor hat and then looking at your deal and being like, would I do that? Would I invest in that? And then you sort of know where to sort of place your offer.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing all of that with us. I think hopefully a lot of people will be inspired by your journey as an entrepreneur. I know I really enjoyed listening to it. So thank you so much for talking with us today.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me, Rebecca.